So yes, I love the Friday the 13th franchise, but when you go from movies 10, 11, and 12, all within a 7-year time span, you end up with 3 very different movies with some of the biggest ups and downs in the entire franchise. So, let's talk about it. What is up, everybody? Welcome to Mad Blood, and today I'm going to be talking about kind of the rise and fall of Friday the 13th, 10, 11, and 12, a 7-year time span in the franchise, which definitely has some fun moments, some great kills, some great Jasons, but also has some of those moments where I say to myself, what the hell are they doing? This time span also includes one of the most hated movies in the entire franchise. All right, and let's just jump right into it and start off by talking about Jason X from 2002. So Freddy versus Jason had been in development for a very long time. They tried to make that movie in the late 80s, the early 90s, the late 90s. And because it was taking so long, Sean S. Cunningham wanted to continue the franchise and get another movie out. So kind of decided to go like a one-off Jason movie just to kind of keep things going. Now, obviously, Jason X is a very unique movie in the franchise for a lot of reasons, but one of them in particular is just how much special effects they needed to make this movie, which the production definitely wasn't used to. But the original inspiration for Jason X came from movies like Alien, Aliens, Blade Runner. Now, obviously, this movie is very different than those 3 movies, but that was kind of the original inspiration. Also, one of the biggest issues with Jason X, in my opinion, came in pre-production. Just listening to interviews with people involved in the production, it kind of seemed like a lot of the people didn't have the foresight when creating the story and creating the script to really consider, okay, how much is this going to cost? Can we actually pull off some of these ideas in a way that's going to actually look decent? That the studio's actually going to give them the green light and say, okay, go ahead and spend X, Y, and Z amount of money on this particular thing. Just kind of blows my mind that that wasn't a big part of the process. They had these big, grand ideas for a Jason, for a Friday the 13th movie in the franchise, with no real foresight on, okay, how are we actually going to pull this off? I feel like when you make a script and you write a story, you should be always thinking about the budgets. Just in my opinion, it seems like common sense to think about the story and the script also with the budget when you're thinking of this movie. So yeah, that's one of the flaws with this movie, is I don't really think they had that foresight to really think of what they could actually pull off. And I mean, I get it, part of the negotiation between the studio and the production is the production's going to try to get as much money as they possibly can to make what they really want to make, and the studio is going to usually lowball them. I get that aspect of it. Now, yeah, they did eventually have a budget for this movie of somewhere around like $10-11 million, something like that, which is actually kind of crazy for a Friday the 13th movie back then. And also just watching this movie, I get it, the effects and the set design and all of that costs a lot of money, but it's kind of crazy to think how much money they actually spent on Jason X of all the movies in this franchise. And now obviously sending Jason to space is a crazy idea, an idea that a lot of franchises have taken, and an idea that you can have a lot of fun with. But even Kane Hodder, when they approached Kane to reprise his role as Jason, and they told him that the movie was going to be in space, he was like, funny. Okay, no, what's the actual story? And they were like, no, yeah, we're actually going to send you to space. And he was like, wait, you're actually serious? But yeah, the intro to Jason X is an intro that I do have some fun with. We're at this Crystal Lake research facility. Jason is chained up. He's basically awaiting to be put in cryogenic suspension, they call it. But one of the other scientists is like, no, we want him soft, right? That line. But is like, no, we're going to send him to another research station to kind of just continue the research on him, on how he regenerates, just basically his tissue. Now, of course, what could possibly go wrong with that? So yeah, obviously a lot of things go wrong with that. We're getting gunshots in this scene, Jason breaking out, just slaughtering people left and right. And then eventually Rowan traps Jason and gets him to go inside of this cryogenic chamber. Now, does the opening sequence feel very low budget, very silly and ridiculous in a lot of ways? Oh yeah, definitely. But come on, man. it's still pretty fun. And also just this idea of this research group discovering Jason Voorhees 455 years later. It's a really fun idea, and also an idea that I could potentially see incorporated into a darker, more gritty and scary type of a story in the Friday the 13th franchise, which I would personally love. I mean, imagine Jason Voorhees going around in like a post-apocalyptic dystopian society on Earth. I mean, are you kidding me? Hell yeah. By the way, that frozen Jason, when they open up the cryo chamber, that looks so damn good. Could you imagine having a statue, a life-size statue of that in your movie room? That would be insane. Also, I don't think we talk enough about how the set design in this movie is actually surprisingly good. There's tunnels, there's all these different rooms and compartments and all these things going on. There's actually quite a bit of detail with the set design in this movie, which is, like I said, surprisingly very good, and also makes me kind of sad we never got a Jason X level in the Friday the 13th game. Now, to talk about Jason a little bit, and Jason X is Kane Hodder coming back to play that character. It's Kane Hodder's final time playing Jason Voorhees in the franchise, and I've talked about this before, but I like how Kane portrays the character. He's not the biggest actor in the world or anything like that, but he's kind of stocky and compact and strong. He's got a very specific look for the character, but I like how Kane has reprised the role a few times in this franchise, and there's that continuity, which is kind of how the character looks, how the character acts. He's kind of a mean Jason in a lot of ways, but just the look of Jason also in this movie is awesome, that we get two different looks for the character. The earlier look, a little bit more of a traditional look for the character. The mask is kind of like the mask from Jason Goes to Hell. It's almost like, it's like fused into the skin. It's just like juicy and nasty. Obviously, we see that moment when the scientist girl is taking the mask off of the face. It's like I said, like fused into the face. And then of course, Uber Jason as well. You either hate it or you love it, I guess. The Uber Jason mask, obviously not a traditional look for the character. Some people hate that. It doesn't fit into the rest of the franchise very well. But a cool, unique, new look for the character, also kind of fused into the skin a little bit. Metal, cyborgy on one side of the character, then the other side has got like the blood vessels and all that going on. Obviously a crazy look for the character, but once again, just great to have Kane Hodder back in this movie playing the character. All right, now let's talk about the kills in Jason X. Now, obviously, the cryo kill in Jason X is one of the fan favorites in the franchise, in my opinion. One of the best kills in the entire franchise. I love how it's a little bit like Scream 2. The girl is kind of like banging on the glass, and the guy on the other side of the glass can't hear her, and then Jason obviously grabs her. She's screaming, puts her face into cryo, and I love how it just basically freezes, and you can hear her scream freezing along with the rest of her face. Jason pulls her face out, admires his work, and then just crushes that girl's head and then tosses her to the side just like a rag doll, and just goes about doing what he does best after that. By the way, after that cryo kill, I love how there's just a surgical machete sitting there. Well, I guess Jason ain't complaining. But one of the biggest missed opportunities in this movie, without question, was how they killed the professor in this movie. A character like that, you gotta kill him in a badass, crazy, holy shit kind of a way. Like, that moment was a perfect opportunity with a machete. He's like, guys, it's okay. He just wanted his machete back. And then they should have, boom, done some crazy machete kill. I would have laughed my ass off. And it definitely would have elevated part of this movie, in my opinion. Also, one thing that's weird about Jason X is we have that moment where the military people are kind of hunting down Jason while the other people are hiding in that room. It's basically a moment that I would think that I would enjoy. It's gunshots, it's Jason just killing a bunch of people left and right, but to me, it's definitely a missed opportunity and probably one of the most boring parts of the movie. I feel like the music is mediocre and just kind of bland, and the kills are also mediocre in that scene, surprisingly, which is just a huge missed opportunity in my opinion. Oh, and by the way, does anyone else think about playing laser tag as a 10-year-old when they watch this movie? No? Just me? Okay, anyways. But in the end though, Jason X is definitely one of my least favorite movies in the franchise. Now, obviously, this is a pretty bad movie. But with that said, there are some moments that I can have some fun with, and there are some moments where it kind of fits into that so bad that it's good category. Now, like I said earlier, I don't hate any movie in this franchise. All of the movies in the Friday the 13th franchise, I can have fun with, especially the movies that are kind of in the back half of the franchise for me. But there are a lot of bland moments in this particular movie, and I think one of the biggest reasons why this movie failed was because Sean Cunningham was thinking with this movie, okay, this is going to be kind of this big spectacle. It's going to have a lot of crazy, silly moments, an uber Jason. At least it's going to make people say, whoa, holy shit, that was a crazy ride. But for a movie like that, Jason in space, this movie, like I said earlier, has a lot of bland moments in it and might be one of the most bland movies in this entire franchise. The characters are terrible. The kills overall, honestly, are mediocre. In a Jason in space movie, you can't just have one incredible kill. You got to give us more than that. But there are two fun looks to the Jason character in this movie, which is a plus. All right, now moving right along to the 11th movie in the Friday the 13th franchise, which is going to be Freddy vs. Jason from 2003, which came out about 1 year after Jason X. Now, I already talked really in depth about Freddy vs. Jason in my Elm Street video that I have on my channel if you want to go and check that out. But just to kind of give you like a brief overview of my thoughts on this movie, I really like it. It has a lot of nostalgia for me. Yeah, this is not by any means my favorite Jason in the franchise. It's more of like a dumb, lumbering Jason who is basically just Freddy's little puppet, does whatever Freddy wants him to do, which I understand how that fits into the movie, and I get why they didn't cast Kane Hodder in this particular role, because they wanted to have like this just bigger, lumbering, like robotic Jason to go alongside Freddy, which was going to be a smaller character, especially when they stood next to each other. They kind of wanted to have that big difference between the two looks. But like I said, not my favorite Jason in the franchise, even though I do like the look of Jason. He has some great kills in this movie. I mean, this movie alone has a couple top 10 kills in the franchise for me. If you want to check out my ranking of my top 13 kills in the entire Friday the 13th franchise, I also have a video of that on my channel. But yeah, the jock kill in the cornfield where he twists his head around, that one always kills me, always makes me laugh my ass off. And of course, that kill in the opening of the absolute asshole, the type of guy in a Friday the 13th movie that you want to see get killed in a brutal way, and this guy absolutely does. Jason surprises him, just stabs him so many times through the bed, his insides are coming out, and then the best part of all, folds him in half with the bed. Just an incredible kill. There are some just damn good kills from Jason in this movie in particular. Freddy vs. Jason also has a fun cast, a cast that I look at as kind of similar to like the first 3 Final Destination movies, but obviously which also fits into this same era. But we also have Monica Keena as kind of the final girl in Freddy vs. Jason, a character that I wish we could have seen more of in either franchise. One of my favorite final girls in either franchise. It's sad to see what's happened to her over the years, but she's great in this movie. I do love though how they bring back Jason in this movie. It's one of my favorite ways in the entire Friday the 13th franchise, how they bring the character of Jason back. You kind of see his heart beating in the dirt, and his body's kind of like morphing back together, and then Jason emerges from the dirt, emerges from the moss, and then just kind of lumbers his way towards Elm Street to do what Freddy wants him to do. But of course, especially when you incorporate Mama Voorhees coming back in that scene as well, it's dark, it's bleak, and yeah, it's just a really fun way to bring back the Jason character. And then of course, the end of Freddy vs. Jason, 2 of my favorite horror icons in all of the horror genre, battling it out in one of my favorite locations in all of horror, Crystal Lake. I mean, it's a pretty damn epic scene. Yeah, at times it feels a little bit like a superhero battle, but it's bloody, it's brutal, it's dark, with just some overall damn fun moments, which also just kind of encapsulates this movie for me. I just think Freddy vs. Jason is a really fun movie. It's bleak, it's dark, it's brutal, but also blends some of the fun moments as well. Obviously, the 2 horror icons finally battling it out. But yeah, overall, Freddy vs. Jason has its flaws, but definitely a really fun time. All right, now, of course, it's time to move along to the most recent movie in the Friday the 13th franchise, which is Friday the 13th from 2009, which is not really a remake. It's more of a reboot that encapsulates kind of the best moments or the best of the first 4 movies in the franchise, which is just an idea that I absolutely love. I love the fact that they decided to go that direction with this movie, which is also a direction that Platinum Dunes, who made this movie and also made the Texas Chainsaw remake and the Elm Street remake, and for the Elm Street remake in particular, they were also thinking about going this direction of kind of encapsulating the first 4 movies of that franchise in one movie in particular, which would have been a damn fun idea for that movie. But just this idea of Jason starting out with a sack head and then eventually, finding and discovering his hockey mask and then going about his business with the hockey mask, man, I love it. So yeah, this is a time period where Michael Bay's production company, Platinum Dunes, was pumping out a lot of horror movies. Now, I've talked about this before on my channel, but me personally, I like the impact that Platinum Dunes has had on the horror genre. I like a lot of the movies that they've made. This movie is incredible. The Texas Chainsaw remake from 2003, also an incredible movie. And I also like the Elm Street remake. I don't know, there's something about their movies. They have a certain look to them, a certain grit to them that I really like. And in particular with this movie, the cinematographer on this movie is Daniel Pearl, who I'm a huge fan of. He was a cinematographer on the original Texas Chainsaw from 1974. He was also the cinematographer on the Texas Chainsaw remake from 2003. Both movies that I think look incredible. And also with this movie, every single time I go back and rewatch it, I'm like, damn, the lighting throughout this entire movie, the mood, just the way this movie looks is really damn good. And so Platinum Dunes has said that they kind of look at the Friday the 13th franchise as basically sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And they wanted to bring Friday the 13th back to what fans really loved about the franchise, and also back to a lot of the things that I really love about the franchise, which I think is great. And I think in this movie in particular, they do such a great job of blending those like dark, gritty, and brutal moments with a lot of moments that are just flat out fun. Great kills. And this movie also, I think, has one of the best casts in the entire franchise. And immediately in this opening, we see their response to one of the biggest questions in the entire Friday the 13th franchise, especially in part 2, which is how the hell did Jason come back in the franchise? Jason was a kid that died in the lake. But here, Jason didn't die like his mom thought. He sees his mom get decapitated. It also answers the question why Jason seems to be so drawn to the machete in particular. Well, he picks up the machete that his mom was killed with and then takes that along for the rest of his journey. And then, of course, you hear Pamela's voice say that they must be punished. They must be punished for what they did to you and me. Kill for mother. And then boom, we transport from 1980, that bleak, dark opening sequence, to present day where we're basically just following these youngsters looking to snag some weed, a little bit of booze, and some ass too. But man, I just love the eeriness to this entire opening sequence. It's nighttime. A couple of them stumble upon this abandoned Camp Crystal Lake that they've heard this ghost story about. They eventually stumble upon Jason's little cabin as well, where you've got his creepy little room with his bed with his name on it. It's almost like a little bit of a time capsule in a way. It's got definitely some creepiness to it without question. Not only that, but the brutality in this opening is great too. Obviously, we get that sleeping bag kill, which is crazy, the machete kills, but also this opening lets you know this is going to be a completely different Jason than you saw in Freddy vs. Jason, which, like I mentioned, is a Jason just kind of lumbering stupidly throughout that movie. This version from Derek Mears is going to be fast. He is going to be mean, and definitely one of the hardest Jasons to get away from. It's a simple idea for a Friday the 13th opening sequence. Horny youngsters stumble upon an abandoned Camp Crystal Lake, but just how the opening is lit, how Marcus Nispel is able to just build kind of the tension and the atmosphere, the kills, the brutality. I just love it so much. And then we cut to 6 weeks later and we get to meet the rest of the cast. Like I mentioned earlier, is a fun cast. I think Jared Padalecki is great in this movie. I think Travis Van Winkle also is a great villain, just this Abercrombie looking asshole type of a guy that you want to see get killed in a brutal way, which he does. I also think Amanda Rigetti as Whitney is also great in this movie. I really, really like her in this movie a lot. And overall, it's just a fun cast. Now, one complaint that I do have with this movie is that it was filmed in Texas. There are times when I watch this movie, it kind of feels just like the Texas Chainsaw remake from 2003, just with the landscape, with the forest, with the type of trees, the look around Crystal Lake. You can kind of tell that it looks like Texas. Now, I understand this is a reboot, so of course they can set this movie wherever they want, and this obviously doesn't ruin the movie for me by any means, but I do think it would have added a little extra to the movie if we felt like we were up in the Northeast again. And also, I have to say, this is easily one of my favorite Jasons in the entire franchise. I do have a ranking of all the Jasons in the Friday the 13th franchise on my channel if you want to check that out. But yeah, I love Derek Mears' portrayal of this character. Jason in this movie is fast. He's this expert woodsman who's great with a bow, who's great with a throwing axe. He's setting traps. He's using people as bait. He's smart. And like I said, this movie kind of incorporates the best of the first 4 movies. And of course, what happens in those first 4 movies? Well, in part 2, we have Sackhead Jason. In this movie, it's not really a sack. It's more of like a wrap, but looks amazing. Sackhead Jason, one of my favorite looks for the character, one of my favorite Jasons in the entire franchise, and then also Jason discovering his mask, which is a mask inspired by the part 3 mask. Great mask in this movie as well. I really like it a lot. But yeah, this version of Jason, in my opinion, like I said, easily one of my favorites in the entire franchise. And also, I think it's one of the scariest Jasons without question, in my opinion. Also, the look of Jason underneath the mask in this movie, I think that hillbilly guy summed it up pretty well. That shit ain't fucking right, dude. But I do think it is a scary, nasty looking look for the character underneath the mask. And I think it blends really well, that look of Jason underneath the mask from part 3 and part 4. I also think implementing this idea of Jason having these tunnels underneath Camp Crystal Lake, it works for me. It's this idea of, okay, how does Jason hide the bodies? How does he hide the evidence? Well, or how does he get from place to place undetected and so fast? Well, he's got these tunnels that he uses, which makes sense. And also, it kind of reminds me, it's a little bit of a plus as well, that it reminds me of the mine shafts from My Bloody Valentine. Now, one thing that's definitely interesting about this movie for me is I don't think this movie has that one showcase kill that I would consider like a top 5 kill in the franchise, but that doesn't mean the kills in this movie aren't great, because they definitely are. This movie easily has, just on average, some of the best kills without question in the entire franchise. I mean, I think just overall, the kills in this movie are honestly stupendous. I also think this movie is one of the best examples of a remake that adds these little nuggets from the original movies, but never in a way that makes it feel corny or just recycled. Plus, so much of this movie, in my opinion, feels fresh for the Friday the 13th franchise and just kind of like a modern take, obviously, on the franchise. Like, this movie, I don't think is just kind of just looking backwards. I think this movie genuinely helps push the franchise forward. You get stuff like Jason popping out of the window like you see at the end of part 2. You get Jason coming out of the water a little bit like you see at the end of the original. Jason hanging near a barn like you see in part 3. And then also Whitney using Jason's name, Jason's locket that he has of his mom with the picture of his mom, which definitely reminds you of Jenny, of course, using Jason's mom's sweater to distract him. So yeah, they have all that stuff in this movie and kind of like a new fresh take on that stuff. But to me, nothing really feels recycled and nothing really feels cheap. Really though, in the end, the 2009 Friday movie is easily one of my favorite movies in this entire franchise. And honestly, one of my favorite slasher movies ever. I mean, it is a damn good Jason, some brutal, great kills. I love this era for horror personally. No, this movie doesn't have the charm of like the Friday the 13th movies from the early 80s, especially those first 4 movies. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have that really like aesthetic, but overall it's just a really fun movie. And man, what a great way to encapsulate the best of those first 4 movies. It's just a damn good time. But with that said, and more importantly, it has been 16 years since we've had a new Friday the 13th movie, which is a travesty. Come on, guys. We need to make a new movie right away. The movie will make a ton of money. Everyone will be happy. Come on, guys. Get on it. But there you go, everybody. That is the rise and fall of Friday the 13th, 10, 11, and 12. If you want some more Friday the 13th content from me, right now, go ahead and check out one of these videos next to me. If you don't want to miss future videos on the channel, make sure you subscribe. That is the best way to do that. All of my social media links will be down below in the description if you want to follow me over there. But thanks so much for watching, everybody. My name is Matt, and I will talk to you in the next one.